Hello, and welcome to Ideas with Diana on January 9th, 2022. Tonight, I'd like to comment about some things that came to mind while watching 60 Minutes. One thing about the StoryCorp idea. But first, I'd like, before to give some background before my commentary on StoryCorps, I'd like to present two pieces of background. The first is, why is it easier for someone to come out as LGBTQ plus rather than Republican? Some people may find that weird that basically if someone is LGBTQ plus, why are they Republican? Because that's the common question I get asked all the time. Um, and what happens is there are more of us than what people think. Just to give you an example, this last summer, I was visiting friends in northern Wisconsin along with other friends that live down here. We went up to a campsite and stayed for a week. And during our nightly campfire talks and stuff, we talked a little bit about current events and also other friends from northern Wisconsin came down to visit for lunch the next day. We had a big cookout like that, a steak and potatoes and everything. And when we talked, basically, many people in the campground stuff looked at some of them because everyone knew all of us were LGBT, lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, questioning, and then basically there weren't too many plus, but there's some. But everyone looked at us and said, "Well, wait a minute, they sound like Republicans, but they can't be true. If they're LGBT, they have to be Democrats." No, not necessarily. And the thing is, why did we sound like Republicans? Because when we talked about things like social issues, like one night we talked about a friend of ours is a retired butcher, and he is talking about how basically when he started in the trade, that basically there was a pathway that you'd start and move up up to trade and even owning your own store, and how that doesn't exist anymore. And others talked about, well, how in owning a business, it's when you own a business, you finally are not living on campus anymore. What do I mean by that? I mean, on campus you can say, oh, let's open a business, let's do this and this and this, and let's set up a table, and it's great. The American lemonade stand is the most best way to teach an example of business. Someone can set up a lemonade stand like many kids do when they're 6 or 7 years old with their parents watching. However, this is where it comes into whether you're a Democrat or Republican, because basically in certain Democratic states, let's say a parent wants to set up a lemonade stand for their child, 6 or 7 years old. They're just going to sell lemonade to neighborhood kids, and maybe the postman or postwoman comes down the block or something, or neighbors or something. And you think it's pretty simple. You get a little card table, a pitcher lemonade that you make, and you get some paper cups, and charge 10 cents, and then basically whatever. Then you put the 10 cents in the box, and what happens, that can be basically allowance money or play money or something else. Well, if you're in some states, whoa, it's not that easy. In some states, the parents actually have to apply, for a sales tax license. Then they have to apply for a retail license. Have to open a business account at the bank. They have to register the lemonade stand actually as a business, file state taxes and federal taxes. Welcome to some Democratic states and even some other states that completely are trying to even shake people upside down, even little kids, to get their dimes and nickels from selling lemonade. Now, that's part of the reason why some of us in LGBT, because when we were growing up, there was none of this nonsense. It was basically set up a table, set up a lemonade stand. Your parents were there watching you, and you sold to kids or people in the neighborhood, and everyone is just happy. They're glad to see that you're learning some basics about how to do business, and also you had to drive to do something, to do a service to help the neighborhood. Now, what happens though is, now basically the biggest issue that comes out sometimes being LGBT, why it's that these that come out as LGBT rather than Republican within the LGBT group or even within the Democrat group is because when you say well you're Republican, they say, oh, you support this thing, this extreme thing. It's no, it's not. It's not that I'm a knee jerk. I'm never a knee jerk person. I support things conditionally and by limitation, and mostly by the person who's proposing them. But before I do support, before I say I support some just on the philosophy, I also look at the implementation. Because when someone says, "Well, okay, well, let's tax the rich," okay, well, in the kingdom of Evanston, some people will correct me in this podcast. It's actually the city of Evanston, Illinois, but I refer to it as the Kingdom of Evanston. When I was down there helping a friend a few years ago after his mother died, I had a chance to live for visit for a while full time in Evanston. And what happened was when I did get a chance to talk with some of the quote liberal people and actually some of the conservative people who actually live in Evanston, and what happens, they were good friends, and both of them told me this. They said, one time we used to believe in taxing the rich, and what we did was basically we drove all the rich people away, and was slowly becoming a ghetto. And I sort of saw that because I said, I remember in the 80s when I used to travel down to Evanston for Comdex, and there's a professor, his wife taught at Northwestern. When I come back from Comdex, we'd actually take the same train back, and my professor, my parents would meet me at the station, and what happened was basically whenever the train went past Evanston, you would never see any graffiti, never. But then as soon as you got down to Lodges Park and Ravenswood would start to graffiti. But now when you go to Evanston, you start seeing the graffiti basically just as you get a little bit past Central Street and even going into Wilmette. And Wilmette in the 80s had the Wilmette Way, which was an arrow pointing down into a garbage basket. It means that any garbage, you throw it in the garbage basket. You don't throw it on the street, and you throw it in the proper receptacle, recyclable or non-recyclable. We have this, but now when you go in Evanston, I mean, you see a lot of graffiti. Even when you look up on the web, there are 400 registered gangs in Evanston. Also, what happens there are many times when I took the train back from Kenosha to visit with a friend of mine in Evanston. I remember there were some women passengers, even though they knew, I was basically male or female. They would ask me to say, well, please, could you just escort us to our car by the Evanston Post Office, which was 2 blocks west of the tracks, on the metro tracks in Evanston. And they offered to pay me. I said, no. I said, you don't have to. I said, I live nearby. I said, I'm just glad you got in your car safe. And what happens, and this was as soon as darkness came. And this was something strange for an area in Chicago where the condos are about, used to be 750,000, but now when you look on current retail sales on Chicago Avenue along the 1400 block, you'll see someone going as low as 325,000. I wonder why, but basically it's because basically people have realized that the old type liberalism, where basically they tell people how to think, has failed, and basically taxing the rich, again, that old time liberal ideas. And this is why many of us in LGBT who run a business, many of us are Republican. We support a social safety net. We support universal basic income, limited universal basic income, which was example of the stimulus in the United States, or universal basic income as how it's done in England for those in the theater fields and in the EU and other in theater fields and other fields. But here's the difference. We realize that we don't live on campus anymore. We all pay our own bills. We all have our own debts. We can't run to mom and dad to bail us out if we overmax our credit cards or we buy something. Those days of the country club living, or basically the basic what's the term I'm looking for? The days of the pretty boy or pretty girl, or basically brat living, are over. They've been over since the late 80s when we lost manufacturing. We have to live with it. We are no longer an upper middle class country. Most of us live either middle class or struggling to get to middle class. In my generation, as in many other generations, like a friend of mine who's a retired butcher, his father worked at Walker as my dad did. His father worked not an executive, but on the shop floor. My dad was an executive. Yet, basically, even as a work on the shop floor, his father was a member of the Racine Country Club, and my dad and parents were offered membership of the Racine Country Club and other country clubs, which they rejected because they wanted to get away from that sort of lazy, so that a false fairy tale world that where people tried to extend something that they wanted my sister and I to be raised in the real world, and that. So I golfed at public country clubs. I golfed at public courses. But just to give you an example how liberalism fails though too, like my home course. And this goes back to why it's harder to say you're a Republican rather than LGBT, because my home course was Pedophile Springs. It was a course that's built during the WPA Works Progress Administration, 1936. And for many years, when I went to the course, there was Tommy. Tommy was basically, he was the course manager, and he was one of the first managers, or the second manager after the course was built. And he stayed there until basically his 80s, when he couldn't work anymore. And he's a very remembered figure. And during that time, he kept the course, and others kept the course straightly for the public. Basic fees, like for example, a monthly pass when I used to go in 1980 was $25 a month, and a 35-cent surcharge for 18 holes. Nowadays, what happens, they made Pedophile Springs my course. The liberals made it from Chicago, who came up, made it into a tourist trap. And what I mean by that? Well, first you have to pay $15 to have an online reservation. Next, you have to automatically have a motor cart. You can no longer walk the course with your own hand cart. Or if you do use a hand cart, you still have to pay a $10 fee. In addition, what happens, you cannot golf by yourself and be put in a single group. You have to either golf in a foursome, or if you're in a single group, you got to pay another fee. And finally, if you want a monthly pass, that doesn't exist anymore. You got to pay what's equivalent to almost like a country club fee of $2,500 for a yearly pass, or if you're a senior, maybe $1,500, or a quarterly pass, a 3-month pass for about $500. Plus, you have to pay $5 surcharge. In addition to those extra card fees. And what happens? People wonder, well, why is golf a dying sport? Because when liberalism took it over from the traditional game and added all these extra fees of tee fee, cart fee, and this is like Chicago a la carte, or I'll say Kingdom of Evanston. That's why people eventually start to switch to Republican, because they realize it only costs so much to run a golf course. It only costs so much and when they're being sold, they know they're being sold. Now, the second background of this is why there's such a divide in the country is I was watching an episode of Batwoman last Wednesday, and it involved basically Alice and how Poison Ivy formed. And what happened, Poison Ivy formerly was a medical doctor, and as a medical doctor, she opened a clinic to help people. But at one point, she ran into a critical issue and critical decision. Well, what happened was basically she asked her liberal friends, which means Batwoman and basically her other supporting members, for help. And what happened was they hemmed and hawed. They said, well, I got to think about this. I got to move the stuff. I got to move this up to Shane. And she said, look, I'm running out of time. I got to make a decision. And it's like someone in a military battle. You have to make a decision. Sometimes you just can't wait for the command to come down from above. And so she made a command decision. And when she did, then she says, oh, you did this. You shouldn't have done that. You should. And she said, look, if I hadn't done this, the person would have died. And basically they said, well, sorry, that there's no in between life and death. You're either living or you're not living. I mean, simple. So what happened was so she escaped from a liberal friends to try to clear her mind, and what happened, long sister Alice, who at first she despised, realized that she said, well, you actually are the only one that listens. Everyone else is trying to tell me, talk to me, talk at me. And finally, in the last scene, what it came out to is this: Batwoman comes up to her other sister and says, "Oh, please, we're sorry for what we did. Please come on over to our side, please." And what happened? Alice asked her questions. This ask them, what will they do if you give in? And she had a special power that could do a hypnotic trance, so that they had to answer truthfully. They couldn't answer falsely. And what happened when Batwoman did answer falsely, and she said, you were telling a half truth, so that basically I would still bite and still have to follow, be held and be falsely accused for what I did. And then what happened when she told Batwoman and the other group, saying, well, look, what I did was needed to be done, and if you're not going to support me, then I'll find another way to prove my innocence. Then at one point, basically, Batwoman's group tried to tell her how to think, and that's when Alice said, "See, they're still telling you how to think." And then shows her going off with Alice and becoming a poison ivy. But the final scene was finally Batwoman realized what happened. She said, "We didn't fail. We failed her because we tried to tell her how to think, and we were talking at her, and they realized it too late. So the episode's left hanging is how are they going to resolve this?" Now this goes back to why that there are differences today, though, because basically, like many times when I tell people I'm a Republican, they ask me, even in the Kingdom of Evanston, most people who are my age or older that are not part of the hippie generation, will say, "Oh, well, what do you think about this?" And I can actually explain in an intelligent way what I do like and what I don't like and what I think should be done to make this proposal workable. But now when you get to the hippie generation, it took over Democratic politics in '73 as part of the far left that dictates Democratic politics. It's like, well, why don't you say you're libertarian? Reason why I'm not going to say libertarian, because then you'll use that in Chicago to say that basically you converted someone away from being a Republican. And I do support some libertarian ideas, but I don't believe in libertarianism completely, because I do not believe that people can completely govern themselves. We do need some form of government, and we do need qualified, mature electors, as Hamilton discussed and wrote in the in the papers of forming the Declaration of Independence. However, regarding why I can't say I'm a Democrat, because here's the simple thing: what happens when I do try to sort of say, no, I'm a Democrat. First, it comes, well, it's like, well, okay, but then eventually it comes, well, we want you to go way over here far left, or else we're not going to talk with you. We're going to shun you. We're going to make you walk in the rainstorm. We're not going to offer you rides when the buses aren't running. Now, on the other hand, with the Republican Party, that in difficult times when I was homeless, guess who stopped to offer me rides, even the strangers? It was members of the Republican Party. They didn't try to convert me. They didn't try to tell me how to think. They said, well, we're sorry that you got caught on this. Where can we drop you off? And I said, well, if you could drop me off, by the grocery store, I can catch the bus back. And one thing they did is they always showed me the driver's license so that I knew who they were. Basically, so basically, it's not a case of getting in a car with a complete stranger. And also, when I worked as an election official, not the reason why people give up on liberalism. At one place where I worked, I and another person were the two Republicans, and there are other people, 5 Democrats, and all of us got along together. But then when the Democrats who were there talked with some of the other party members, at a post-election party, and they said, "Oh, you like those Republicans? Oh, you're horrible. You've lost our ideals, and are you sure you're thinking properly? And blah 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 blah. We're gonna discipline you for this. And finally, at the next election, those 5 people, after being yelled at and harassed and ostracized, they became Republicans. And they said the prime minister says because of you two. He says you two are so nice to work with, as well as other people. Says and also you allow us to think how we think. If we don't have to worry about what the current group think is. We can think, as we're allowed to as Americans, and that's why liberalism is being given up upon, or the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is more of people that actually do have people who actually do think clearly, and also that they can think their own thoughts without having to be corrected or without having to be told, "Are you thinking properly? Maybe you should take a rest, or maybe you know you don't know what you're talking about, or something else." And there are many people who actually still read. I read the National Review, Washington Inquirer, Atlantic, um, Newsweek, the Sunday Times of London, the Chicago Tribune, Wall Street Journal, Milwaukee Journal. So various points of view, various points of the political spectrum, even RT, and that, like that. And the thing is, well, again, people on the far Democrats say, well, you're really a bootlicker for the Republican Party. And I had to look up what that term meant. I had to look up what bootlicking meant, because it's just like when I found out about heard the term waterboarding, I had to have friends tell me exactly what that meant. I wasn't raised that way, so I don't know what those terms mean. So I looked it up, and it's a reference to a term during pre-World War II and World War II, where those who collaborated with the Nazis had to lick their boots, and also goes back to other points. And I'm not a bootlicker, and neither are many other LGBTQ people who are Republicans. Many people, people who know me. I know I'm very independent, and there's sometimes I'm known to pound the table a few times like this. Even harder, that some people wonder if I'm going to break the table when I'm making a point, because I'm part Irish. And the thing is, this is where when we talk about getting the country together, or using a different type of 1950s psychological methods that they mentioned in 60 Minutes. The point is, even with a facilitator, if the facilitator is biased, there's concern. But from what I saw, it looked like the facilitators do try not to be as biased. But the point is, though, is the way we have to get together is like this this thing mentioned 60 Minutes with the StoryCorp and where basically 2 people of similar views talk, and also another one where on the site thing where 2 people of opposite views talk. But when they talk, though, I'm going to listen to some podcasts, because I'm going to see if they're pitted against each other. Because when you pit people against each other like this, bang, 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 that's not really a discussion. That's a Roman gladiatorial event. And there's a classic belief in the Bible that basically evil always overcomes good. Good always overcomes evil, and that's a classic thought in the Bible and other faiths, even conservative Orthodox faiths. However, in an episode of Star Trek, even the character Mr. Spock said that actually isn't true. Evil only succeeds if they're very, very accomplished at this gladiatorial fighting thing, and that's why we have to really look on what modern ideas are and postmodern ideas are. But one thing I do to keep like that, because I had street preachers and other preachers and lay preachers without a university degree try to pull things over me, quoting things from the Bible. So when I first transitioned, or even before at the old house, we used to have this, which is Unger's Bible's Handbook. And it's a handbook of the Bible explaining different passages, and it's illustrated. But also another thing in this too is, for example, it has a section called When in Need. So let me just read a few. When you feel afraid, one of them says, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Psalm 34.4, and also Psalms 27, 46, 56, 91, Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 and 27. Or when you feel anxious, cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, also Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1, and also chapter 1, verses 1 through 13, Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34, and chapter 11, verse 28, Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. Now, some people, now this is where you get in trouble with some people of the liberal faith, or even like in the kingdom of Evanston, because they say, well, if you believe in God, you're not really an intellectual person. You're one of those dumb people, and such and such. No, I have 3 years of study and doctoral degree at University of Phoenix for Doctor of Management in Organizational Psychology. Graduated with an MBA in 2007 from the University of Phoenix, summa cum laude, as well as maintained summa cum laude grade point in my doctoral studies. UW Wisconsin graduate at University of Wisconsin Parkside in pre-med and applied computer science with 3 independent studies and enough credits to satisfy a master's degree upon graduation. In addition, an honorary doctorate in artificial intelligence. 12 published papers on artificial intelligence neural networks in various Society for Computer Simulation proceedings. Editor of Emergency Management Conference Proceedings for the Society for Computer Simulation from 1993 to 1999. Associate Vice President of the Society for Computer Simulation, 1993 to 1999. And Special Guest Editor of the Simulation Journal, June 1996. However, based on my faith, I was raised First Congregational. So, in my faith, we are not allowed to try to convert people at all. We're not allowed to do any type of conversion at all. It's always, if people want to follow what we're doing, they can follow but we're not allowed. And also in the workplace, we observe a very strict rule that of no religion in the workplace, because work is a captive place. Even if someone says, well, let's have a prayer, those who don't want to have a prayer can walk out of the room. As a First Congregationalist, we don't support the prayer and business that does it that way, because that one person leaving the room will be ostracized at one point in their career or working for that company. So basically, it's one thing if it's done outside the business and as individuals off company time, and that no one is required to be there, that's one thing. But when people are required to be there, like in a closed work environment, or work environment is concerned, then as First Congregationalists, we don't support that. The second thing is we don't believe in wearing sumptuary clothing at work. So as some people will know, when you do look up on internet, First Congregationalists were once considered part of the Puritan Church and separated from the Puritan Church in 1690 because of the Salem witch trials. The First Congregationalists were the ones who defended the so-called witches, and also they were the intellects who were cast out by the Puritans, by the way. So, but to get back to my main point, the issue that exists with the separation, with this separation of philosophies, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or other, is basically it's the problem is it's not the Democrats just being far left, but also there's some Republicans that are way too far right, and those of us who are compassionate conservatives and compassionate conservatives to the conservative Democratic spectrum, realize that represents most of the thought in this country. It's not this far extremism that represents the elites, and and that's where people get controlled by advertising media, and that's why you hear terms like fake media, false media, untrue media. And there are times that I found out even during this pandemic, regarding the reporting and even like some of the things I literally have to shut the news off because I can't watch the news some days because it gets me so upset to see how low the standards are and how much people are reporting what they call talking points. Now to report parroting talking points. I mean, I could go from one channel to another channel, and it's almost like basically they're holding up a script. And you almost think you're watching the movie 1984, where someone's speaking from the Newspeak Dictionary and the Newspeak Media Guide, and it's like it's different from what I used to remember journalism used to be when basically the reporters were professional and they kept their political viewpoints and religious viewpoints to themselves. Because there are many reporters that had different, and many people didn't know what their political viewpoints were until they retired. But when they heard them on the news, they always knew that basically they were fair, they were impartial, they weren't judgmental, and it's like the old dragnet, just the facts, and checking your facts on that. So, what my point is basically, I think the StoryCorp idea has some promise to it, but if it's going to be pitting, people against each other, like one site that's recently started, I don't think that's going to work well. If it's going to be basically where the facilitator is open-minded and doesn't have an agenda and doesn't try to force an agenda and allows the two people to actually speak the way two people would speak, as if they met at Barnes and Noble having coffee or something else like that, like two strangers having coffee, and then one person sees someone and say, well, that's a good magazine. And the person says, well, yeah, I read this all the time. Says, well, here, would you like to join me and just have like a coffee chat? That's fine. But when I talk about coffee chats, they're not talking about as what you see on TV, like with The View, where basically you have someone trying to shut another person down, or basically you have a lone Republican on there just to prove that they're, quote, balanced. Actually, when I do watch talk, I normally watch talk more because I stopped watching View because I got tired of this. And I have a heart condition, so I can't shout like that, and also it does aggravate. So that's why I watch the talk, where basically it's like, well, what do you think of this? Well, I think of that, and they have people who are both Republican and Democrats. It's not a token Republican. It's not a token Democrat. So ABC, please, if you want to make the View better, tokenism went out in the early 1970s. If you're going to have a Republican on there, have at least an equal number of Republicans on there as you do Democrats. Well, just let me know what you think. You can reach me at Twitter on Ideas with Diana. Or also on Twitter, you can reach me at my second website, which is at Diana1A. And the reason why I use these handles is because my last name can be very hard to spell for some people, and I just use a handle to make it easier. It's Diana1A or Ideas with Diana on Twitter. Well, let me know what you think, and I'll have another broadcast shortly.